Scott Morrison later said it was this meeting in Paris in June last year where he told Macron of a number of concerns with the project.
At that point, I made it very clear that a conventional diesel-powered submarine was not going to meet Australia's strategic requirements. We discussed that candidly. I did not discuss what other alternatives we were looking at, but what we did discuss was the issues that we were still dealing with the attack class submarines. An important one of those was our view that this project would be further delayed. He asked for the opportunity to discuss that further, to address our issues.
Another key event came a little over 2 months later, on August 30, in the form of a 2+2 meeting between Australia's Ministers for Foreign Affairs and Defence and their French counterparts. This August meeting is key to the French claim of deception. They say there was no indication the contract was in trouble. And now, documents released to 7:30 through Freedom of Information laws appear to show Australian defence officials expected good news about the submarine contract to be passed on at the meeting. An email from Defence Secretary Greg Moriarty to Greg Sammut in the submarine program thanked him for a comprehensive update on the contract and ended with this:
"I will ensure that the good progress to date is part of the advice we take to government, and you will hear that message repeated in the 2+2 with France and in other engagements. Regards, Greg." The
officials noted French shipbuilder Naval was working well with the Commonwealth and that the updated cost estimate was $46 billion within the $50 billion budget. If their positive feedback was indeed passed on to the French at the August 30 meeting, it might explain the shocked reaction in Paris when the Prime Minister stood up just 2.5 weeks later to announce the plan to acquire nuclear submarines elsewhere instead and to cancel the French contract.
We will not be continuing with the attack class submarine program and have advised the Naval Group and of course the Government of France and President Macron of that decision. We share a deep passion for our Pacific family and I look forward and I hope to see us continue once we move past what is obviously a very difficult and disappointing decision for France.
Earlier, I was joined by former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. Malcolm Turnbull, what do these documents tell us that we didn't know about the submarine deal with the French?
Well, they confirm that the submarine program for the new attack class submarines was on track, was in good shape, was progressing well and was well within its budget. Now that's completely different to what the Australian government told the American government, whom they told it was blowing its budget and it was off the rails. And it was completely different to what was written up in the media constantly for some considerable time last year and the year before, namely that the project had blown its budget and was off the rails. So here you have the Secretary of Defence, Greg Moriarty, an outstanding public servant, saying to Greg Sammut, the Rear Admiral who was running the project, that he was so pleased the project was in good shape and that he was going to ensure that those positive messages were passed on to the French government at the 2+2 ministerial meeting, which was held on the 30th of August, barely 2 weeks before the Australian government withdrew from the French program and announced this AUKUS arrangement.
So it basically confirms the French, as a result of what you're saying, had every reason to believe that they'd been lied to, particularly at the 2+2 meeting.
Yes, the French, absolutely. The French were misled by Australia, which is shameful, and the Americans were misled by Australia, as Joe Biden demonstrated when he made it quite clear publicly to President Macron that he had been led to believe that the French were aware that the project was going to be cancelled. And in fact, we know, confirmed by these documents, that far from the French being aware the project was going to be cancelled, they were being told the project was in good shape.
Well, we saw in that little package before the interview that the Prime Minister said that he did warn President Macron that there were problems with the contract, that the government was worried about delays and things.
Well, he may well have spoken about issues of the contract and that I'm not challenging that. The one thing that is absolutely clear is that the Australian government did not give the French any reason to believe that the project was about to be cancelled. and what we know from this correspondence that's been released under FOI is that the Department of Defence ensured that the French government got precisely the opposite indication, that is to say, that the project was on foot, was progressing well. And the documents speak for themselves. It's not a question of having an opinion about it. So the reality, look, there was always the option for Mr. Morrison to be truthful and honest. He could have been honest, and he could have sat down and said to Emmanuel Macron, look, we think we should move to nuclear propulsion. And he could have had a discussion with France about that. The French have nuclear-powered submarines. They don't use weapons-grade uranium. They'd actually be much more suitable for Australia than the American technology. But he could have had that discussion. He could have dealt with it openly. And the fact that he didn't has caused enormous damage to our reputation around the world, including in Europe. But look at the damage it's caused the United States. Joe Biden has had to effectively apologise to Emmanuel Macron in public at the G20, saying that the way the matter was handled was wrong and there should have been open consultation among allies. So, it's quite an effort. I mean, this failure to behave in an honest and open fashion, as you should, has damaged our relations with France, damaged America's relationships with France, and of course undermined the good name that Australia has as being a country that sticks to its word and that can be trusted. So, look, it was regardless of what you think about the submarines, this was a diplomatic debacle of the first order, and the consequence has been that it has undermined Australia's honour, security and sovereignty.
Well, all of these big defence contracts are always controversial. This week we've had disclosures about the contract with BAE, the $45 billion contract to build frigates. You signed off on this in 2018, but now we've got these leaked reports saying the start time is under pressure. There doesn't appear to be a, quote, single coherent managed ship configuration. Doesn't that just show that all of these things are very difficult to sort out?
Well, these big defence projects are very complex and very difficult, and that's why it is so extraordinary that the submarine project, which we now know was regarded by the Defence Department as being on track, within budget, in good shape. So it's so extraordinary that was blown up. Something that was actually on track is blown up. I've seen those reports about the frigates. Obviously, I don't know, to what extent they're true or not. I mean, we chose the British Type 26 frigate design because we were looking for an anti-submarine warfare vessel, and the British design was able to meet that in a way that the two alternatives, one from Italy and one from Spain, were not, or at least were not without extraordinarily expensive and difficult modifications, which would have effectively resulted in you having a new design for those vessels too. So I'm satisfied the decision to go with the British frigate was the right one, but these projects, you can make the right choice, but then you've got to manage them and execute them. So it's a lot of this is in the execution and management and supervision, and that's, well, Mr. Dutton's on later. He's the man in charge of that at the moment, so he should explain it.
One of the features of the controversy with the French was the leaking of a text message. The government seems to have a bit of a problem with leaked text messages. We've seen this week free character assessments of the Prime Minister by the New South Wales Premier and a Cabinet Minister. Were you surprised by the actual content of those?
I wasn't surprised by the content. I was a little bit surprised that they found their way into the public domain. And
what do you think of the timing of that leak? Do you think that it was a deliberate, malevolent act against the Prime Minister?
Well, Mr. Van Onselen has said that the screenshots of this text exchange between the New South Wales Premier and the Federal Cabinet Minister were provided to him some time ago, and that only recently did the Federal Cabinet Minister, who he says is in the Cabinet today, gave him permission to go public with it. So, clearly whoever authorised Mr Van Onselen to release that did not have Scott Morrison's best interests at heart.
Everybody has a theory about who the Cabinet Minister is. Have you got a theory about who might be the texting minister?
Yes, I will name the culprit.
Right. Yeah.
It was Colonel Mustard in the library with a smartphone.
Okay, thank you for that. Speaking of all of this, a lot of it is seen as coming out of the warring factions within the New South Wales Liberal Party. Can we just have a look at something you had to say about the New South Wales Liberal Party and how it works in 2015?
We have a great representation of men and women drawn from every imaginable occupation, from farmers to soldiers to policemen to people in small business, people from big business, every occupation, every profession. We're not run by factions. We're not run by, well...
Do you still think
yes, indeed, that went down like a lead balloon, didn't it?
Do you still think that the New South Wales Liberal Party isn't run by factions, given how apparently paralysed it is about pre-selections
Yeah, look,
today?
New South Wales Liberal Party is run by factions. I was talking about the federal party room, where at least in 2015, you know, the factional divides were not particularly, defined. So what I said was actually reasonable, applying to the federal party room, but saying it to the New South Wales division of the Liberal Party was pretty silly. So anyway, I deserved the response I got. But yeah, there is clearly factional warfare going on here. And I mean, look, the reality is that these pre-selections are being held up deliberately, and it's crazy. I mean, the Constitution is there. The party members are entitled to vote in pre-selections, and the party should get on. And, you know, whether it's the Prime Minister or the Premier or, you know, people on the committee, the executive, should get on and hold the pre-selections in accordance with the party rules. It's pretty straightforward. And the way they're holding it up is I can understand why a lot of members will be getting very fed up.
How much trouble is the government in?
Well, I mean, it's, you know, it's, what is it? It's 8 points behind in news polls, elections in 3 months or so. It's in plenty of trouble, yeah, for sure.
Malcolm Turnbull, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 7:30's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.